Hey friends, this week on the show, I am joined by Jason Bulman from the Word on Fire show, Meet the Bulmans, talk about his really interesting and incredible faith journey, about family, about fatherhood, the vocation of marriage, the vocation of the permanent diaconate as he approaches his ordination as a permanent deacon, and so much more. It's a really incredible discussion about how God uses us, how we can respond to God and live out our lives true to that calling as what Jason says and calls us beloved children of God. It's a fantastic conversation. You're going to love it. Please watch, please enjoy, and thanks. Hey friends, welcome back to the show. Thanks for watching. Thank you for listening. A reminder, if you're watching on YouTube, thank you. Please subscribe and hit that bell button so you get notified when new videos come out each week. And hey, we're on podcasts too, everywhere fine podcasts are found. And if you're listening on podcasts, well, we're obviously also on YouTube at youtube.com/the Cordial Catholic. This week, I am joined by Jason Bulman. Jason and his wife Rachel and their 6 kids live in Florida. Jason is a physician's assistant. He's in formation for the permanent diaconate in the Diocese of Orlando, where the magic happens, I am told. And he, of course, is one of the I want to say stars. It's a weird word. One of the feature actors, the principal parts of Meet the Bulman, the fantastic show from Word on Fire, along with his wife Rachel and their kids. It's fabulous. Jason, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here, and hello.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor. So glad to be here.
This will be a lot of fun. I think we had, of course, your wife Rachel on the show a number of episodes back, episode 45 or so. I think she speaks very highly of you, which I think is fantastic. And so I want to hear a bit of your side of the story of how you guys met and began a family. And we've seen some, of course, on the show, which is a fantastic look into your family. I want to hear your side of the story. I want to hear your faith journey as well. I think it's I want to unpack that. I want to talk a bit about that diaconate too, as well, because I think that's an amazing angle we haven't really touched on this program in the 3 years I've been doing it. And I have an awkward story I want to tell you at some point about my experience with that. That's what's awkward. But let's start at the beginning. So you go back as far as you want to go back, and tell us a bit about growing up. I don't know, was it a Catholic home to begin with? Did you become Catholic along the way? I'm going into this kind of blind. I don't want to know a whole lot beforehand, so I want you to tell us, and we'll just sit back and enjoy the journey. Where does your faith story begin?
Yeah, beautiful. I always start off this story by just kind of explaining that I really did come from quite a beautiful household. Both of my parents come from very loving families, not a lot of divorce. I was praying about that before I came on here. Not necessarily overtly Catholic per se, but in my household, I knew I was very much loved. And it's funny because growing up, it was kind of a safe haven for many kids. Kids who came from broken homes or were kind of struggling financially and that kind of thing would end up staying at our house. We had even a seminarian stay at our house for a while because it was just one of those houses where when you walked in, you were not a stranger. I mean, it was kind of maybe even over the top and obnoxious how well you were welcomed into the house, like you were part of the family. And I think that's, remembering a little bit of Rachel's interview, that was like a big part of her, coming into the Catholic faith, actually, was just the witness of the love that was, fostered in my house. But for me in particular, I ended up kind of buying into, what the world tells you, which is simply, not the truth. I think that each one of us, as I reflect on it, struggles with this fight within our hearts of who am I? How do I approach life? Do I need to prove myself? Am I loved? These kind of things. How am I going to live my life? And so there's always this sort of negative voice that was there in the background, even though I was so well loved by my family. So unfortunately, I bought into those negative voices. And whenever you're sort of insecure in who you are, you end up I ended up going off to college and trying to sort of recreate myself, because I was not happy with who I was. And after a lot of spiritual direction and that kind of thing, I've come to understand that the very gifts that I was given were the precise things that were attacked by the evil one. You become ashamed about some of your greatest gifts, and so I was struggling with those particular gifts that I had, those particular callings that I think that I now know I had. And so I sought off to college to sort of recreate myself. And, the mass kind of went by the wayside, even though I was raised very much Catholic, went to mass every Sunday, that kind of thing. But I clearly did not have an intimate relationship with Christ at that point. I think that the notion of God was still sort of in the realm of maybe philosophy, or, in the realm of an idea. Like, I believed that God was real rationally. I thought it was a pretty irrational thing to think, that we just kind of showed up and, the whole atheistic notion. But nevertheless, it didn't sort of incarnate in my heart until I was in college. And it, like many of us, I think it took me hitting a sort of rock bottom before I was open to receive God's love. Because until I think you have recognized your own belovedness, and you let God give you your identity, you're going to be in this mode of striving to assert your own identity by either obtaining things or achieving things, or that kind of thing. And you're in this mode of sort of proving yourself, or finding your identity in something out there rather than something in here. And so that struggle, I think, precisely because I was raised so well, it is so still acute in my mind. Like, and I think that's the essence of conversion, is when you finally realize reality, which is that God created you out of nothing and merely for the sake of loving you. And he doesn't want to live without you. When that sort of stark reality finally settles in your heart, everything changes. Your whole reality changes. And, one of the fruits of that, I think, is peace. And so I often tell people, I did not know what freedom was until I was 23 years old. Until that point, I had pretty much lived my life in a false reality where I was trying to, either obtain the affection of other people, prove myself. And whenever you're on that path, it always leads to disappointment. It always, is unsatisfying. So I found myself at 23 years old. I hadn't been to mass in a long time, probably 5 or 6 years. And I had pretty much ostracized myself from my family. My mom, God bless her, she suffered a lot. One of my friends throughout this time was actually he was discerning the priesthood, and he was counseling my mom, and she was praying this note to Saint Monica throughout this whole time. And so I attribute a lot of my conversion to my mother's prayer life and the intercession of Saint Monica. But nevertheless, through a pretty, still mysterious way, when I try to recount that period when I was 23 in college and things had kind of hit a rock bottom, I still don't fully understand, how it happened. But, Bishop Barron often talks about the fact that God takes the initiative, and there's this this rushing in of grace. And I certainly can attest to that, because I've found myself finally just as a beloved child. And I knew at that moment I didn't have to do anything. And so for the first time in my life, I started making decisions in a place of freedom, like as a loving response to a God who I found had loved me. And it's hilarious because thank God I was raised Catholic, because the first thing I thought was, well, I really long to pray and be in silence. And so I'm just going to start praying the rosary, didn't really have a good grasp on it, because it had been such a long time. I mean, I knew the Our Father and the Hail Mary, but it was still it was like this new concept to me. And so I just started praying it, and I started to go to Mass at, I think it was Our Lady Star of the Sea in Ponte Vedra, which is in Jacksonville, just south of Jax Beach. And I knew I shouldn't receive, because it had been, a long time, and there was a whole lot of healing that needed to happen before I started to truly, come back to communion with the church. Because I had received all my sacraments and everything. So one day I was like, you know what, I'm gonna write down the last 5 years, and I'm gonna go to confession. And so I wrote, several pages of, not just sins, but just lies and, all of the brokenness that had been, settling in during this time. And I grabbed the priest after Mass, and I was like, Father, is it okay if I go to confession? He was like, sure, why don't you come in here? And he just brought me into the little gift shop, in the narthex, because, nobody else was around. He shut the door, and, I got on my knees in there. And the priest didn't know what was coming, and looking back on it now, I'm like, wow, that was really unfair, because this was more like a general confession, it should have been set up appropriately. But yeah, I went on for quite a while. I got on my knees and just poured my heart out in tears and that kind of thing. And at the end of it, he looked at me and he was like, that was beautiful. And, what brought this on? I'm just curious, how did you come to do all this, And I was like, Father, I'm still trying to figure it out myself. All I know is that I just, I started praying the rosary, and he was like, oh, okay, well, I think that Our Lady saved you. And I was like, wow, I didn't think about that, but I think that's very true. So that kind of began my journey with Christ, with the Catholic faith. And I did not have a spiritual director. I didn't know exactly how to deal with this, because I was so overwhelmed with joy, because I was so inundated with darkness for so long, that I knew one thing, and that was that I longed to be with God. I longed to pray. I didn't know what that meant, and not even the best way of how to go about discerning how to do. So I just found myself in solitude a lot, and I was in between. I was just about to go off to PA school, and I was now moved from Jacksonville back home for just a brief period before I was going to go on to get my master's. And I was just kind of hanging out with my sister and some friends in town a lot. We would go to a local pub and throw darts and talk theology a little bit. And in walked Rachel into the bar. And Rachel's a really quiet person. I don't know if you remember that, but no, she's not. She's the opposite. So she initiated conversation. And, one of the first times that we talked, it was like we talked for hours. And if you remember Rachel's story, she kind of grew up in the Protestant church. I mean, from the time she was a child, kind of, she has a beautiful voice. She sings really well. Her dad was a pastor. So she was very much involved in almost every church in town, because she's so gifted. And so we were both at a point where we had been affirmed in God's love. We didn't necessarily need somebody, and I often tell that to couples, it's not like the other person should complete you. You should be a complete person, because of God's, rushing in, and you find your identity as a beloved child of God in and of yourself, and that will then give you the freedom to gift yourself to another person. And so we happened to be kind of at that place. I was definitely not looking for a spouse because I was about to go off to PA school, which is exceedingly hard and arduous work. And so that was kind of the last thing. But she was very persistent. And so fast forward, now I'm in PA school, and I was still struggling with how do I give my life to Christ and be a married person? Because, again, I didn't have anybody to flush this out with. So I kind of saw a dichotomy there, like a false dichotomy, like somehow Rachel would be an obstacle to me being able to pray as much as I want to, and I think that a lot of young people say, well, if I want to be a saint, I have to be a priest. And that's just simply not true, of course. I didn't know that at the time. So here I am in the midst of getting my master's degree, and it's very arduous work. The whole time I'm in class, all I can think about is going home to my little apartment and just praying in solitude. And then Rachel's driving all the way to Orlando from Lakeland to spend time with me. And I'm like struggling with I do love her, but I love Jesus, and I just don't know. I'm like freaking out right now. I don't know how to deal with this. And it was beautiful because, prior to me going off to PA school, Rachel and I had flushed out the sort of Catholic Protestant issues there because she was Protestant at the time. And so there was a big chapter of our journey even there together before I went off to school that was really important. So we were already kind of growing together, but she was not yet Catholic. She had not made that leap. And unbeknownst to me, she was going to RCIA without telling me. And she was driving, every week to Orlando, which is about an hour and a half, to get to this parish to go to RCIA. And, so she's making all this effort to become Catholic now, which was not for my sake. This was, very independent, clearly, because she didn't even tell me. So she's making that transition, but I didn't know that. And so there was that sort of issue on my heart as well. I know that, I believe everything the Catholic Church teaches, and there's a little bit of an issue here as well. So through lots of grace and study and prayer, not only did Rachel come into the church, but we did discern the marriage vocation. And as soon as I got past that obstacle, it was like this huge relief as well. Like, marriage is the normative way to holiness. The priesthood is sort of an extraordinary way, living an eschatological reality now, but the normative way is the married life. And so that obstacle set aside, and then now Rachel and I could fully gift ourselves within the context of the Catholic marriage. She became Catholic, and we got married just several months after that. Because we were both so on fire, ministry was naturally just a part of our life right from the get-go. So, when we were married, we basically right away were involved with a young adult ministry that flourished very much locally here in a parish. And we've been doing young adult ministry ever since. And we've been married for 13 years now. So I don't know where to go from there.
Well,
any thoughts on all that?
Oh, that's an excellent start. And I love how that journey unfolds. And I love this idea of, you quoted Bishop Barron, of this grace kind of rushing in, and this kind of that I don't know, that indwelling of the Spirit. I was raised kind of nominally Christian, nominally Protestant. And I had this moment where I kind of realized that Jesus loves me, and he was there. And I remember, and it's so strange to me in hindsight, and at the time it was too, but I had this sense that if God was there, if this was all real, and I come to a point where I thought that it was, that I wasn't worthy to be a child of God. Like I'd done something wrong. I didn't even know the concept of sin, like theologically. I just felt this kind of strange feeling that, okay, if God is real, I'm not worthy to know him very intimately. And I remember falling on my face, prostrate in my room. I was like, say 13, 14 years old. I didn't know that I was assuming a prayer position that, monks had used for centuries, right? Millennia. I was doing this thing that just seemed natural to me, to go on my face in the ground and say, God, if you'll have me back, please, I want to know you. And that for me began this crazy, right, infilling of grace. I didn't even know what I was even doing, right? So when you say that God kind of takes that first step, right? And like that resonates deeply for me, right? And I think too for listeners then who are on this journey, like Rachel was, like I was, as converts to the Catholic faith. I mean, like you were in part as well, as a kind of a revert, right? That resonates deeply with listeners, I think, and viewers. That idea that, okay, am I being called to this, to become Catholic? Like God takes that first kind of step towards us and presents that, I think, in those cases, right?
Yeah, 100%. God is always overly generous. He, at every moment, he's waiting for us to just turn our gaze towards him. As we sleep, he can't wait for us to wake up. We have to take just the ever slightest gaze towards him in openness, and I think that the grace just pours in. And sometimes it's not the same for all of us. We each have our own journey, but for me, it definitely took it took a vulnerability that I was unwilling to give, I think.
Yeah, and you're right too, that I think this especially is, you guys do ministry with young adults, and this especially is true for, I think, that age group. But I mean, it's true for all of us, right? That Satan, right, attacks us where we have these gifts. You said, I think that's so true. For you look at the saints through all of time, how often that is true, that those things that those saints had been given as gifts from God are what the devil, who's a very real person, right, tries to use and turn turn us away from God, right?
Oh yeah. It's funny now that I have, like you said, I have 6 kids, and my second son is very much like me in terms of his disposition and his heart and his gifts. And so it's very funny now seeing him. I can see kind of like taking yourself out of yourself and being able to reflect on yourself when you in this situation. And um, just to share a little bit, one of the particular gifts that through spiritual direction, I think that God has given me is a kind of innocence of heart. Um, I can see it so well in my son Jeremiah, just this beautiful innocence. And at some point, that is going to be threatened, and you'll have a decision to make, whether you're going to believe this lie that there's something wrong with me, or it's something that I should be ashamed of, or whether you're going to embrace this gift and let God, through His grace, let it flourish in your life. So typically, where you're being attacked is the very thing that God is calling you to. And maybe whatever your particular vice is actually is going to be the very means, the virtue that contradicts that vice is going to be the very virtue that you are called to in particular, that will then give life to the rest of the virtues within your soul. So the devil knows, he knows where to strike. And so, that's why we need help to sort of discern these things. We need good parents to sort of see these gifts within their children and foster them, and see where these attacks are going to take place, so that we can defend our children from the lies that ensue.
Let's dig in there for a minute, because I think you mentioned this in your upbringing, and I remember that Rachel mentioned this too, coming into your parents' house, your family home, and how dynamic and welcoming that was. And then I think of you guys starting your home, opening up your home to us on the internet to watch you guys in your home, which maybe is a bit creepy sometimes, I don't know. And then us, other young families, taking inspiration from that and lessons from that. I just wonder what we can say about the idea of the Catholic household, that domestic church, and how, what lessons you've learned or can share from how we do that and shape that and make that home really that family unit, right? That domestic church, that first place of learning about the faith. Like, where do you begin to walk in that path to make that happen?
Yeah, so that's such a good conversation, such a good topic. Something that's very much on our hearts, something that, it has happened organically in our life, but then also we've, studied things like theology of the body and several encyclicals, especially from John Paul II, Familiaris Consortio and things. But this idea of the vocation of marriage is such a beautiful reality that I think is not spoken about enough. It's not something that's realized enough within the church. I think that the two places that the devil attacks the most within the church is the priesthood and the family.
Yeah.
I don't think that's any, coincidence at all. And it's very easy to see that. So the way that it has manifested in our household is, your first vocation is always to holiness. And again, your reality needs to be rightly oriented by first an encounter with Christ, who gives you your identity. And that then frees you to be able to gift yourself to others. And in marriage in particular, you're gifting yourself one to the other in a very complete fashion. and it's, sanctified by grace. Just like holy orders, the marriage vocation becomes a source of grace for others, and people don't realize that. They're both in the same category of sacraments. And so you have to get this part right if you're going to have a good family life. I think a lot of times people think, well, if we have kids, then that will fix things. And that's definitely not a path we want to go down. All the graces that flow out into our children, into our family life, and then into the community are all sourced within the sacrament of marriage, within matrimony. And so simply being two Catholic people who love Christ, love the church, are studying, about the faith, trying to grow in holiness, and trying to, have chastity and virtue within the marriage, just really trying to live that out is definitely been the source of grace for our family. So as I reflect on it, the way I see, even my fatherhood is a blossoming, if you will, of my sacramental marriage to Rachel. It's beautiful because she is even the one who first tells me I'm a father, because she knows she's pregnant before I do, right? So she even issues me into that aspect of the vocation of marriage and parenthood. And so as we gift ourselves one to the other, that particular mode sort of flows into this beautiful blossoming of having children. And then you really learn the sort of sacrificial love that God the Father has for the Son once you enter into parenthood. I love that sort of explanation where the love between spouses is like that of the Holy Spirit. It's a being with. And then that sort of flows into this parental love between you and your children, which is like a being for, like the Father is for the Son. But what precedes both of those, like we already said, is a being from, which is that of being a child, because we're child first, both chronologically, but then also theologically, because in our baptism, we're grafted into Jesus Christ, the Son. And so being grafted into him, even in heaven, our premier mode will be that of the Son, because we're one with him in his body. So our identity lies mostly in a being from, in a being, in being son or daughter. So it's beautiful how even the chronology of the human person, as he, first being a child and then going into spousalhood and then going into parenthood, has this sort of beautiful progression where you get to share in each of the different loves of the persons of the Trinity in that particular order. And when you're doing that, I think, people are so starved nowadays for a wholesome family that it's such a sign of contradiction. I mean, anywhere we go, just the fact that we have 6 kids, it's like, wow, people are taken aback, very, very taken aback by that. And then when you invite young adults who are in this period of their life where they're really discerning, what do I do with my life, and what is God calling me to and stuff. And we invite them into our house where they see, Rachel and I very much in love, very much pursuing holiness and studying. They're like, wow, this is real. Like this is a possibility. And then our kids run in and they're running around and they're, all, they don't know a stranger in the whole world. They're jumping on people's laps, and we're talking theology and people are crying. And it's just such a healing balm, I think, for people when they come into a loving household. I mean, it's a type of evangelization in and of itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, and this is, I mean, this is what Rachel articulated when she met your family, right? Yes, it is, right? That form of evangelization. And now you guys are carrying that on now as, I don't know, second, third generation of this kind of evangelization of the family being that tool for evangelization. I think that's incredible as you articulate that. That's just so beautiful, Jason.
Yeah. Yeah, it's beautiful. I really do. We thank my parents all the time for being the sort of example of that reality. Because you have to see it, I think, to believe that it could be real, that it could be possible. And we've had other young adults who wanted to do the same thing and have had success in our diocese, where they try to, invite young people to their house to just be with them, to be with their children. Because, healthy marriages are, I think what the rate of divorce is 50% now, right? It's, or even more, even within Catholic marriages. So, it's a huge opportunity for people to evangelize.
You talked about marriage and the sacrament of marriage and the idea of grace, and this occurred to me more recently, and I can't remember where it came from, maybe just teaching this to the candidates in the RCA at my parish, but the idea that, I mean, the sacrament of marriage is a sacrament, and grace flows through the sacrament. So, I mean, properly speaking, grace flows through that marriage, right? That's a vehicle, a vessel for God's grace. And I think you touched on that so beautifully, Jason. I think framing it in that kind of way, right? That quite literally this thing we have here, husband and wife, is channeling God's grace. That really does reframe what a marriage is, right?
Yeah, 100%. There's a responsibility that comes with it, and a beautiful participation in the life of God. We don't hold a deistic theology where God just kind of created us and then sits afar. I mean, even Christ himself, invites us into this salvific mission. It's this theodrama that we get wrapped up into, and it's such a fulfilling life. When your life is just about the petty things of this world, even if it is, career and house and good things, even if it's good things like, being successful so that you can have a house and provide for your children and leave a legacy for them. And all those things are good, but they're really petty in the grand scheme of things, right? I mean, it's not until you recognize that you're brought into this drama of eternity, of this God who's always existed and who is love and who has created all of this in this grand plan, that your life really takes on a whole nother context. It's a lot more fun. It's a lot more fulfilling. And we need it because it's the truth. It's the truth. And like Augustine said, our heart is restless till it rests in God. We're made for God and for eternity. And spreading the good news is such a privilege. It's such a beautiful thing. And marriage is supposed to be that normal vehicle for it. And so it bears fruit, not only in just children, some people are even unable to have children, but yet they will have children in the spiritual sense when they live this sacramental marriage well, because grace just flows from it. And the world is in such desperate need for this kind of healing that I can't even tell you. You take a young person who's in need of just being loved, you put them in a loving household, loving, between two spouses, and you can really, you can change people's lives,
Yeah, I absolutely affirm what you're saying there. I think that's so true, and I want to dig in there for a minute now, next, I think, because this is like you say how starved culture is for seeing good families, and that's absolutely true, right? That's so deeply true. And I think of this, what you and Rachel are doing at this kind of ministry that you model of bringing people into your house, and just the idea. I mean, we would call this in the evangelical world discipleship, right? The idea that you guys are showing other people how to live out the Christian faith. I think that's so lost in the Catholic world in a lot of places, and people like myself who are converts to the Catholic faith, who come in kind of guns blazing, looking for these communities of Catholics who we can connect to and hang out with and raise families with, kind of go, oh, what? Because it doesn't exist in many places in the same way that it does in the evangelical churches, where I think relationship is much more emphasized sometimes. I mean, to the detriment of the sacraments and and worship, as the church has done for 2,000 years. There are, of course, pros and cons, but we've lost, like, what you're doing in the Catholic Church, I think, is lost in many quarters of the church in North America. So how do we, like, what do we do to begin to rebuild that, apart from just copying your model, which maybe we should all just be doing?
Yeah, I think that that's the sort of $10 million question. You know, the answer is always personal holiness. When it comes to these things, we can get overwhelmed with ideas and methodologies and that kind of thing. But I think personal holiness, and then really working at your marriage and authentically gifting yourself to your spouse, you know, dying to yourself for the sake of others, sort of trying to escape this temptation to make life little, make it about, you know, your ego and these kind of things, but rather laying your life down for your spouse. The graces that flow from that, I think, is the proper way to start. But then, you know, to also believe that it is something that is worth something. You know, I think that we tend to think, well, I mean, what do I have to offer? I don't have a lot of theological knowledge, or I don't have, we tend to belittle it. But I think that if more young Catholic families recognized the potential that they have to really be that sign to other people, it could change the face of the planet. I mean, I remember reading it somewhere. It said, I forget who said it, but it was like, you know, to heal the family is to heal the world. Because we really are, I think it's in one of the documents of Vatican II, where they call the family the sort of basic cell of society. And it's this idea that self-gift, you know, is God's love is always expanding, and it's precisely through self-gift that it expands. So, you know, the man and woman gift themselves, which bears fruit into hopefully children, and then the family itself gifts itself to its local society as well. You know, and you always struggle with, you know, I got to protect my family, I got to protect my children. I don't want to just, you know, invite whoever into my house. There is that element. But I tell you what, we have not had anything but I don't know if you want to call it success or grace upon grace by allowing our home, you know, allowing people to come into our home precisely for the sake of loving them and sharing the gospel and that kind of thing. So, yeah, I would encourage people to pray with that and to think it's possible and to know and to sort of, you know, even read some good stuff from JP2, like Familiaris Consortio, on the potential that's there as Catholic couples, as married couples, to really change society for the better.
That's fabulous stuff. That's just fantastic, Jason. I love that. I want to touch a bit now on your journey to ordination, the permanent diaconate. I think you're on that journey. I want to lighten the mood by telling you my ridiculous vocation story, which is really a non-story. I've always felt a strong sense of, ever since I was kind of discerning becoming Catholic, I really wanted to, felt a call to being as close to the sacraments as possible, and giving myself in service to the church. That has always been a draw for me. And of course, I couldn't be a priest. I was already married once I began to discern Catholicism. And so I thought, well, I've heard of this thing called permanent deacons. And so I think I was Catholic, like, no, I don't think I was even Catholic yet. And I called our vocations office and said, I think I'm called to be a deacon. And the wise priest kind of went, well, all right, tell me a bit more. And I let it slip that, well, I wasn't Catholic yet. My wife wasn't Catholic yet. I hadn't really told her I was thinking of becoming Catholic yet. And he very, very wisely kind of said, well, maybe call me back in a few years and we'll talk about it. And I've been wisely discerned to not to rush into that route, but I have not abandoned this. I still definitely feel this calling in my heart, and doing this podcast has also definitely been a calling in my heart, and I can't do them all at the same time. So it's one of those things that you discern. I was maybe very I was very naively discerning that initial calling as a non-Catholic guy whose wife didn't even know what the call he was making. Tell me how you, I think maybe probably more sensibly, began to discern this vocation on top of the vocation of marriage to the permanent diaconate, and maybe a bit about what that even is for listeners who are like, what?
Sure. Yeah. Well, as you said that little story, what came to mind was it actually makes a lot of sense. And it's funny because one of the guys in my diaconate class had a very similar experience to you, where as soon as he knew, like, I'm going to become Catholic, he was pretty much already like, I want to be a deacon.
Okay.
And his wife had just became Catholic, like right before they started the diaconate program.
Oh.
So, and it's actually worked out well. I mean, it takes 6 years to become a deacon. So, there's been plenty of time for them to discern this. And I think it is very clear that he has a calling, and she's very much on board with it. But the reason why I say it's not irrational for you to have that sensation is because I think that, like we've already said, when you find yourself as beloved, the natural response is to love in return and to want to gift yourself in return. And so this beautiful calling of the diaconate is one particular way that's, I guess, more obvious or more public, more clear, where you can live that reality out. And so it's something that, especially, as a young person who has fallen in love with the liturgy, and wants to be close to the sacraments and stuff, it's one way where you're like, yeah, I mean, that looks really attractive. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I wonder now if I made a big mistake, Jason, and not pursuing that. I'm second guessing myself.
Well, there's time. There's always time.
Yeah.
So, but for me in particular, I told you before that I was kind of struggling when I met Rachel with this desire for maybe the priesthood, and I was trying to discern that and giving my life to Christ. So that desire, it changed, but it was always there. This absolute knowing beyond a doubt that I love the Lord Jesus. He is the central focus of my life. Everything revolves around that relationship. And so my vocation to the diaconate, which I guess for people who don't know, there are 3 tiers, if you will, within holy orders. At the top is the bishop, And then underneath that is priest, and then you have the diaconate or deacons. Priests share in the priesthood of the bishop, and deacons share in the diaconal aspect of the bishop as well. And diaconia simply means service or a servant. So as a deacon, you are ordained, and so you share in the same holy orders, and so you become a cleric. So I won't be a layperson anymore on June 11th when I'm ordained. But what's unique about the permanent diaconate, which is relatively young, it was introduced at Vatican II. So anything in the church takes about 100 years before we really have fleshed it out. So we're, 50, 60 years in and still trying to, flesh out the theology of the diaconate and the particular roles that it's going to play. But what we do know is that permanent deacons have a particular role nowadays because we live the life of a married or of a lay person, if you will. In other words, we have jobs, a lot of us are married, and yet we're clerics. And so there's this unique opportunity to be a clerical, a cleric within the context of sort of your normal secular life. And so you can, use your imagination and you can see the amazing opportunities that are there simply being a deacon and working in the medical field. And, most, I know a lot of people in Lakeland. It's not that big a town because I've treated most of their orthopedic needs, and most of them, or a lot of them, know that I'm going to be a deacon, and simply knowing that, and simply witnessing to that is huge. I mean, it's huge. I mean, it strikes up conversations. People ask you to pray for them. So not only am I like giving them a cortisone shot in their knee, but sometimes I'm praying with them, and people ask me, to like talk with their, young children, pray with them. And, there's all kinds of beautiful organic opportunities, much kind of like the married vocation, where it may not be in the context of liturgy necessarily, but rather outside the walls is the way that people use the terminology. Outside the walls of the church is where a lot of evangelization happens for the permanent deacon. And that's actually how the calling occurred for me. And that's part of the reason why I've, sometimes, much to my chagrin, know that this is a real calling. Because it's not something that I sought. The calling began, as many vocational callings do, within the context of ministry, but through the mouth of another, person. And we were in our sunroom where we always bring all these young adults to come and just spend time and pray and talk theology and philosophy. And, I'm sure I was on some kind of diatribe and animated in my love for some, aspect of theology. And someone was, one young woman was like, "Hey, you'd be a great deacon." And I mean, I swear almost instantly, as soon as she said that, I was like, "Oh no, oh gosh." Oh, I think that's, something that I would like, but I kind of tucked it away, but that seed was planted and I knew it. And then, actually Father Blake was very involved in the beginning of the ministry too. And he was like, he was not yet a priest, I don't think. But he was like, "Yeah, you would make a good deacon. You ought to think about that." And I was like, oh, "Okay." But for a permanent deacon who's married and that kind of thing, it doesn't really become a real possibility until your spouse says something or is at least on board. And I can't remember if I proposed it to Rachel or if she said it. As soon as she did, though, I was like, okay, I'm all in then. I mean, if you're saying like this is a possibility, like I really want to do this. So I was very excited. And as I reflect on it, it really is beautiful that it kind of came within the context of a ministry that was technically outside the walls, where we were, witnessing to people, evangelizing, not necessarily in the context of liturgy, even though that is a very clear and vital role of the deacon within the context of the Mass, which we could talk about, some other time if you want to, or whatever. Everything flows from the liturgy, so that's a whole nother talk, but it really is a beautiful story. And I'm still in shock that the Lord would call me to become a deacon of his church. And so, it takes about 6 years to go through here in the Diocese of Orlando to get through all the formation. And so I just finished my master's in theology, which was great. Something that, I've always studied on my own, but I really wanted to study formally. So that was really nice. And then we're doing all the wrap up as far as, practicums like baptizing, fake baptisms and funerals and weddings and, serving at Mass and all those kind of things, which is just fun. It's just so awesome.
And that's so close for you. That's June 11th, you said, right? Like that's scary close.
Yeah, it's right around the corner. So, and I'm just excited at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's a vocation like marriages, right? So I mean, it's a kind of marriage almost in that sense, right? That kind of that class of sacrament, right? That's pretty exciting.
Oh my gosh, yeah, unbelievable. Yeah, I mean, and it's I think it is kind of unique to share in both the marital and the holy orders. Although, I mean, there are a lot more deacons coming around right now, and they're definitely, I think, is providential. They're fulfilling a role in the church that I think has not yet been fully realized, the potential there. And so I'm actually just excited to see how it all unfolds as more and more people become permanent deacons in our church.
Well, and I'll be honest with you, I'm learning about more people that I know that are becoming deacons every day. I feel like I turn around someone that I knew for a while on social media or something is suddenly a deacon. And I said, oh, well, didn't know you were becoming a deacon. And all of a sudden they're a deacon. So I think you're right. I think there's something happening here. I think it's pretty amazing. This calling, right? And I like how I mean, you're a cleric, but you maintain your regular job and your family. So you're in the world in a different way than somebody, a priest would be, in and serving the world. And I think like you've illustrated, given some awesome examples of how that's different, how that's unique, and how that's so interesting. That way of evangelizing, I think, is so, I don't know, it's so interesting. It's so personally compelling. This is dangerous territory for me now.
Yeah, I'm gonna pray for you that maybe maybe that's in your future too. We'll see.
Oh, that's amazing. Jason, this has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you this last hour or so. It's awesome to, for our listeners, for me personally, it's gratifying to have these bookends of you and Rachel on the show and hear both your perspectives on your family and your journeys. I think that's so interesting to listen to these two sides of that same kind of conversation. And just the witness that you guys are in the world and the model of servant leadership, of serving the family, of bringing that to us through the work of your show. There's so much I want to thank you for, and there's so many questions I want to ask you in parting, but maybe I'll just ask you this as we close. What, and I think you'll say personal holiness is the answer, I think, but I'm going to ask you anyway. What would you say to those young Catholic families, maybe those converts especially, who are just becoming Catholic from a different Christian faith? Because I mean, my wife and I were there. We converted a year apart, and we're kind of both a little bit lost at first as to how to raise our family Catholic in a faith that was new to us. So I wonder, what would you say to those people who are listening to this show, who are just becoming Catholic on the cusp, or just became Catholic at the Easter Vigil or a couple of years in? How can they go about doing what you do, witnessing to the Catholic faith, sharing their family, bringing that cell of the church and the family to a wider world, and evangelizing with that? What advice would you have in a nutshell for those young Catholic families?
Yeah, practically speaking, I think that you've got to have a personal prayer life. You've got to have a prayer life with your spouse, and it has to be a daily thing. I mean, nowadays, to be a Christian, it takes sainthood, because the world is so overwhelming, and the voice of the world is so loud, that really does take some real intentionality to work at this business of sanctity. And so, personal prayer life, family prayer life is absolutely essential, and it has to be every day. And I would suggest, that it needs to be more than just, a little prayer before bed or before meals. But one practical way that Rachel and I have really imbued that in our house is the Liturgy of the Hours.
Yeah.
I mean, the church has given us this beautiful means of setting apart time throughout the day, with prayers that are simply already designed and beautiful and straight from the Psalms. They're very scriptural. It's a way to it's an extension of the liturgy into your daily life. And so the means are already there for you to do it. And it's life-changing. When you start to pray these things with your kids, even if they're running around, or even if it's hard to pay attention, embrace it. I mean, embrace that beauty. I mean, it's not uncommon for one kid's rolling around on the floor while the other one is doing the reading. It's a beautiful reality, and it's awesome when we get with other families that do it as well. And now we have, 10 or 15 kids in the room, and it's somewhat noisy. Some kids are distracted. One kid's crying, and but you can feel the presence of the Holy Spirit just invading the room, and so and then I think reading is very important, because for those of us who, not for those of us, but for those people who have been given, an intellectual life, studying theology, reading the church's teachings, encyclicals, and stuff like that is vital. And maybe for those who do struggle in that way, God will provide some grace. So I do think it's important to study your faith. There's so many great resources out there. I mean, even just the Catechism of the Church is a great place to start, because it will kind of inform your faith. When there's a lot of question marks, maybe our faith can get distracted, or we have some misunderstandings. And so approaching it from the standpoint of being on your knees, always seeking to know God more, seeking to know his church more, throw yourself a little bit into it, and invest some time in that as a couple, so that you grow together. And then, maybe pray with how the Lord is calling you as a family to engage in the life of your parish, because, the parish is kept alive by, good-hearted people, giving of themselves. And so if you have the capacity to do that, then it's very life-giving as well.
Yeah,
Is that good?
that's fantastic advice. I think of my experience becoming Catholic. I did RCIA in just a very, I didn't really know the difference between any Catholic churches. I thought they're all the same wherever you went. So I literally called the closest one to my house in secret at first. My wife didn't even know I was calling them, and that's a whole other story. But I went through the course, and kind of the last session was this. I was looking forward to it the whole year, this get involved session. Like, how can you get involved in our parish now? And I thought, okay, here are the chances to meet these other Catholic couples and to get involved in different ministries and these things I was looking forward to plugging into. And the lovely sister who ran the program brought out this literally a dusty stack of pamphlets and kind of blew the dust off the stack of pamphlets and handed them out. And this was like what's happening in the parish. And it was things like, the sewing club, or like knitting circle, or like spaghetti dinner, or something called adult childminders, which I think was like you babysit kids during like the mass on a Sunday morning. I'm not really sure what that actually entailed, but I just remember thinking like, oh no, like where's anything in this parish? When you say get involved in the parish, I'm like, yes, like there's, because we're the parish. We have to be the ones to do those things, right? And to start those things often, as God calls us to. So yes, Jason.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Well, listen, I want to say thank you for being on the show, for your time this evening. It's been a real pleasure for me, and listeners I know will love this episode and our conversation. Where do you want to point people towards to see or hear more from you? I don't think you're quite as active on social media as Rachel is, but we could see you for sure on YouTube. I know you're there.
Right. I know. It's funny. I think that most people know about me through Rachel, which is okay. I think there's some theological, reason for that. I mean, our Blessed Mother, being sort of at the top. So I look at it that way. But yeah, I think that checking out the YouTube channel, We're on Fire for Meet the Bulmans, is probably the best place to get to know us better. And I am somewhat on social media, but not very much. I hope that changes in the future. The diaconate has been, quite hard, but who knows? Maybe, after I'm ordained, I'm hoping that our some homilies and things like that maybe in the future. We'll see. So yeah,
that sounds fantastic, Jason. I want to say God bless you and your ministry and the work you're doing with the show, your vocation as a deacon, as a father. It's wonderful stuff. So thank you for all that, and thank you for being here with us today.
My pleasure. God bless you.